society to recruit them. The feudal system was based on a complex web of rights and obligations among rulers, nobles, serfs, peasants, and freemen. With little or no commerce, land and its produce were the only forms of wealth, and with it power. Each feudal lord held sway over his land grant and its people. Over time, feudalism was built on the uniformity that had been previously imposed by the Roman Empire. Due to a pre-existing warrior culture, knights became exalted superstars. They were the product of long training in both military skills and spiritual and societal matters. What bound knights together as a social group was a detailed code of values, behavior, and accomplishments, including courtesy, refinement, honesty, largesse, and gallantry. Becoming a knight certainly meant developing skills of combat and the use of arms, but it also entailed hunting, learning to read, and playing games like chess. Knightly ideals can be grouped into three strands: noble birth, Christian values, and military prowess. Literature about knights, such as those of the legendary King Arthur and his court, you can see in this picture here, we'll read all the captions later. King Arthur and his court became popular and would have a profound influence on the origins of the European novel. The importance of chivalric culture and storytelling persists today through its extensive use in fantasy fiction and fandom, gaming, animation, television shows, and movies. One way to truly understand the nature of knighthood in this period is to meet some of the knights themselves, whether historical figures like Richard the Lionheart or literary ones. In fact, the line between historical record and literary invention is often blurred. Literary models influenced the behavior of real knights, while real knights offered abundant material for writers of literary accounts. The first is Godfrey of Bouillon. One of the earliest and most representative examples of a chivalrous knight was Godfrey of Bouillon, circa 1060 to 1100. After the 14th century, he was included among the so-called Nine Worthies, 9 men through the ages, some historical, others legendary, deemed to have embodied the ideals of chivalry. Godfrey was the son of Count Eustace II of Boulogne and Ida of Lorraine, and together with his brothers helped lead the First Crusade in 1096. Godfrey's fame and prestige among the diverse group of barons commanding the crusade grew so that, when the Crusaders succeeded in reclaiming Jerusalem from Islamic rule in 1099, they offered Godfrey the throne of the new kingdom of Jerusalem. Godfrey, in a gesture that ticked all the chivalric boxes, refused and piously argued that no one should wear a golden crown in the city where Christ had worn the crown of thorns. Instead, he agreed to be called the Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Godfrey was such an exemplary knight that he became legendary. Embellished tales were written about his journey to the Holy Land and established his noble lineage. The best known of these stories is the legend of the Knight of the Swan. Originally, it was the tale of an anonymous knight who appears in a boat drawn by a swan to rescue a damsel in distress. By the end of the 12th century, popular tellings identified the protagonist with the Bouillon dynasty and claimed that the mysterious Knight of the Swan was none other than Godfrey's grandfather. It was a story that wove together fact and fiction around the figure of one of the 1286 to 1219. He served as royal advisor to four English kings, Henry II, Richard I, popularly known as the Lionheart, John, and Henry III. Even members of the French court grudgingly acknowledged that he was the best knight in the world. William guided these four kings wisely through numerous crises and dangers, making his name synonymous with the model of the chivalric virtues of his time. The details of Marshall's life have been preserved in a literary account commissioned by one of his sons, L'Histoire de Guillaume le Marshal, written in Old French verse. Its lines chart Marshall's meteoric career, from leaving his father's house to train as a knight. As a second son, this path was expected, to the final hours of his life. Although Marshall was no ordinary knight, the account does offer much insight into what life was like for knights in general at the time. There is a description of Marshall's training in the house of the powerful Norman nobleman Guillaume de Tancarville, who was his mother's uncle. His investiture as a knight in 1166, and his first military campaign. Soon young Marshall would find an activity that would shape his life and become a true passion, the tournament. These contests were far more brutal than the folk pageant version celebrated today, more like battles than games. Young knights took part, either individually or in teams, hoping for a chance to demonstrate their fighting prowess and perhaps win themselves fame and fortune. During the late 1100s, tournaments were enjoying their heyday, and Marshall excelled at the jousts. For more than a decade, he was said to have unhorsed and captured more than 500 combatants as he went from tournament to tournament. Defeated knights would have to pay a ransom, together with the spoils from seizing harnesses and saddles. Marshall could enjoy a highly valued chivalric practice, largesse. Generously in distributing the bounty from his wins allowed him to forge valuable loyalties. As well as excelling on the tournament field, Marshall acted as master of arms and confidant to Prince Henry, son of Henry II of England and heir to the throne. The young prince died before he could wear the crown, and William fulfilled the promise he had made to him to travel to the Holy Land, where he fought for 2 years alongside the Templars. When Marshall returned, the king offered him the hand of Isabel de Clare, Countess of Pembroke, one of the wealthiest heiresses in the kingdom. The union raised Marshall to the highest ranks of the nobility. His days as a knight-errant were over. Marshall would continue to shine on the battlefields. When Richard the Lionheart was away on the Third Crusade, William protected his throne against the maneuverings of John Lackland, the king's brother and regent. After Richard's death, when the same John's right to the throne was in dispute, Marshall was one of the few great nobles to remain on John's side during the First Barons' War, in which the nobility rebelled and forced King John to issue the Charter of Rights, known as the Magna Carta. This uncompromising loyalty to the crown sealed William Marshall's reputation as the greatest knight of his time. He died shortly after his last great military victory, the Battle of Lincoln in 1217, where he succeeded in driving the French army out of England and forcing the French king to give up his claim to the English throne. Ulrich von Liechtenstein. While some knights became immortalized through the poems of heroic deeds written about them, others crafted those poems themselves. A rich tradition of literature and illustration developed around was knighted in 1223 by Leopold VI, the Duke of Austria, one of the most prominent politicians and patrons of his time. Leopold promoted chivalric pursuits at his court, and soon chose Ulrich from among the Styrian nobility. Ulrich was granted the important positions of seneschal and marshal, but it was for his writing that he has been remembered. Two of Ulrich's works survive. In the Frauenbuch, or Book of Ladies, he laments that courting ladies, which he considers a cornerstone of chivalry, is in decline. The other, the Frauendienst, Frauendienst, or Service of Ladies, is a poetry collection, apparently autobiographical, in which Ulrich reflects on conventions of courtly love and chivalric pursuits. He frames those reflections through two adventures in honor of his lady. In the first, the knight travels disguised as the goddess Venus and competes in jousts and tournaments from Venice to Vienna. During his journey, he faces and defeats several hundred knights. In the second adventure, this time disguised as King Arthur, he sets out with the intention of testing himself against every knight who crosses his path to bring honor to his lady. A miniature of Ulrich von Liechtenstein is among 137 such illustrations included in the Codex Manesse. The Codex brings together ballads and poems in High Middle German by some 140 Minnesonger, and was compiled in the early 1300s. Ulrich appears in the image wearing a suit of chainmail and galloping on a large horse. In his right hand he holds a blunted jousting lance, and in his left a shield. The poems and illustrations in the Codex Manesse offer some of the best surviving sources for understanding chivalric life at the time. And here's the miniature here. There's Ulrich. I love the drawings of the ladies here. They're pointy heads. That's amazing. The second Boucicaut. Later in the 14th century, the chivalric ideals of heroes on horseback were increasingly at odds with the military reality in which soldiers engaged on foot. As a result of this change in military strategy, the cavalry of knights on horseback lost the essential role it had played for 200 years. By the time the 15th century got underway, it was reduced to more of a court spectacle. As knights moved away from the battlefield and to tournaments, the ceremonial forms of combat became increasingly elaborate. In this transition, memorable figures emerged, including Jean II Le Mingre, also known as Boucicaut. I wonder if that's Jean II Le Mingre, I'm not sure. Jean inherited his moniker from his father. Boucicaut means either fish basket, associated with slyness and greed, or more flatteringly, cautious ox, associated with prudence and strength. Like his father, he also succeeded to the office of Marshal of France, a position of great power. As a child, he was a court page and rode in his first military expedition when he was just 12. He left accounts of his grueling training schedule to build strength. Boucicaut ran great distances, perfected jumping from the ground into his horse's saddle, and learned to climb ladders using his arms alone. At age 16, he was knighted and took part in the Battle of Rysbeck, Flanders, in which the French won a major victory. For 2 decades, he was the hero of the European battlefields. And the battles continued. In 1348, Boucicaut fought alongside the Teutonic Order in their crusade against knights, he founded the White Lady of the Green Shield to protect the female relatives of knights away in battle, on crusades, or who had died. This order would attract the praise of court writer Christine de Pizan, who was outspoken about the rights of women. The perilous life of a knight often entailed suffering, and Boucicaut did endure two major defeats. First, he was among the band of Christian knights surrounded by the Ottoman Turks at Nicopolis in 1396. His second and definitive defeat came at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. The English captured Boucicaut and took him to England, where he died in 1421. The end of chivalry. The English longbows and trained archers combined to bring victory at Agincourt, along with the tactics of sneak attack cavalry charges and defensive maneuvers of massed unknighted foot soldiers. Longbows and new tactics led to killing an enemy at a distance. Black powder firearms, long-barreled arquebuses, muskets, and pistols came on the scene in the late 1400s, further changing combat. Knights had fought face to face with their foes for so long and considered doing so a mark of honor, but these changes made their suits of armor and methods of combat seem outdated. Systemic changes also hastened the decline of knights. Monarchs grew stronger and were able to develop more modern institutions to collect taxes, create courts of law, and fund standing armies. Distance grew between the church and the state as both competed for power and influence across Western Europe. The knightly world created by feudalism, with its articulated values of nobility and this is the tournament one. We already looked at that one. This is Ferns Castle, built by William Marshall in Wexford in Ireland. It says, seeking the prize, winner takes it all. William Marshall's knightly career is one of the few that was meticulously documented, albeit in a somewhat embellished form. The first biography, L'Histoire de Guillaume de Marshall, was commissioned by Marshall's son and heir, and relates Marshall's adventurous life. It is a fantastic resource for colorful details about the tournaments knights competed in. Competitions in the 1100s often featured giant melee battles, in which teams of knights would square off against each other. At the end of a particularly boisterous battle, Marshall's helmet was so battered and misshapen that he had to employ the services of a blacksmith to pry him out of it. Marshall enjoyed such great success on the tournament circuit, that card outside enjoyed it too, that in 1179 he even formed his own battle company. Marshall employed a patient strategy for his team, holding back while allowing other teams to fight each other at full strength until they were exhausted. Then his team could strike and easily win the day, and all the costly spoils that fell to them as victors. This is in London's Temple Church, and it's believed to be William Marshall. His tomb. Character development, Tale of the Swan King. The Swan Knight. Talking about knights here. German composer Richard Wagner's 19th century opera Lohengrin was inspired by the Swan Knight myth, first told in a late 12th century text, the Dolopathos, in which an anonymous knight appears in a swan-drawn boat and rescues a maiden. A few years later, the same figure cropped up in a chanson de geste, or song of heroic deeds, the Chevalier au Cygne, the Knight of the Swan. In this iteration, he has become the grandfather of Godfrey of Bouillon. This chanson is part of the so-called Crusade cycle, set during and just after the First Crusade. In the 13th century, German authors like Wolfram von Essenbach and Conrad von Würzburg further developed the Swan Knight's story, and their work would form the basis of Wagner's opera. This is a Flemish tapestry of a scene from the Swan Knight tale, and it says this is the knight's mother, Beatrice. Next we have role models, lessons from the past. The spread of chivalric ideals led to notable historical figures being framed as great knights in the medieval tradition. In Western Europe, this popular ideal was forged into the canon of the Nine Worthies, or Neuf Preux, in Jacques de Longueville's Vows of the Peacock in 1312. These worthies exemplified chivalric values and virtues. Pagan, Jewish, and Christian, they represented three distinct chapters in chivalric history. The first trio were Trojan hero Hector, Greek conqueror Alexander the Great, and Roman general Julius Caesar. The second were from the Old Testament, Joshua, King David, and Judas Maccabeus. The last trio were King Arthur, Charlemagne, and Godfrey of Bouillon, the most recent addition. And there's a fresco here of the Nine Worthies. I'm not sure which one's exactly which, because these look like women here. So anyway, this is in Saluzzo in Italy. And this is the last one about Arthurian knights, seats at the Round Table. The Knights of the Round Table were heroes of the realm in Britain's Arthurian legend, dedicated to ensuring peace in the mythical kingdom of Camelot, hard-won in service to